Students, how are you? I hope you're doing well today. I'm doing pretty well, and I'm excited about this reading. It's we've had a number of different readings in class already, and this particular reading by Hannah Arendt is one of the kinds that opens up a series of questions for us. So we will have a few claims that we'll go over that are claims unique to her that she, in the rest of the book, which we're not reading, that she backs up and argues for and gives support for. But most of what we'll do is that she has a really interesting way of putting her finger on certain big questions that were sharpening in how important they were in her time and have only gotten sharper as important questions for us. So today is as much about asking some very philosophical questions. It's actually more about asking these very philosophical questions than it is about explaining the answers that Hannah Arendt gives to any particular question. So there's still plenty to go over because the way she asks the question is very important, and the way she does it will sort of show you both that things have changed, that today is not like yesterday, which I'm sure a lot of you believe, but also that we still can understand our present and future in terms of the past while admitting that they've changed significantly. So the present and the future are not just some repetition with some small inflection or modification of what's come before. They're not just a repetition of what's gone before, and yet there's a continuity with the past. We can use the past to understand the present, even in its difference. Okay. So just a few quick things about this reading. In writing in general, if you see a word you don't know and it's in italics, those sort of diagonal letters, that's a foreign word. So it's a common way to mark out when a word is not native to the language you're writing in, is you put it in italics. Now, what that also is supposed to signal to the reader is like, hey, don't feel bad if you don't know this word. It's not even part of your language. So if you see those a lot in her reading, she's often using ancient Greek and Latin. You can always Google those things to see what they mean. You might email me instead, because sometimes there's a specific usage she's doing that's not necessarily what will pop up first on a dictionary. You can always, of course, email me that. She does try to give context to explain it, but it's just a heads up is that no one expects you to know all these italic words the first time through. That's just the nature of having more than one language in the world. Okay. Another thing is that this is really high-end philosophy. I trust you in the intro class to be able to handle it with my assistance, but it is a high-end piece of scholarship, so there's all these footnotes. For our class, you don't have to read those footnotes. There's tons of interesting information in them, that information at the bottom of the page, but you don't have to read it. In fact, the reason it's in a footnote is that she has something else she wants to add, but since it's not absolutely essential to what she's saying, not absolutely required to understand her main point, she puts it in a footnote at the bottom of the page. A bit like the italics, I'm here just signaling to you things about college, ways that scholarship is written in college that I didn't understand when I first read it. So in case you haven't figured this out yet or had it explained to you yet, I'm giving you a few little heads up. So for our class, you don't have to read the footnotes, but I would say, when you're reading stuff for your major or high-end classes, you probably do have to look at those. For us, it's a bunch of historical evidence that we don't need to get into. Last little bit of context. So I pronounce her name Arendt, but actually it's supposed to be said more Arendt, but that doesn't roll off my tongue easily because that's the German pronunciation. So she wrote this book in America, but she is German originally. Why is that? Well, Arendt has a sad but interesting history. She was a German Jew living in Germany before and during World War II. Now, you all know what Germany did to the Jews, not only their own nation, but Poland and other countries as well. They tried to wipe them out and exterminate them. So she saw this coming for reasons we'll get into in just one moment. She saw this wave of violent anti-Semitism and fascism rising in Europe. Remember, not only the Germans, but say the Italians were also had fascist governments around this general time. She saw this happening and tried to flee to America. It was not easy. Some of her friends died on the way, but she did eventually get out and came to New York. So she and other Jews, especially German Jewish folks fleeing World War II, came to America as immigrants, as refugees, and really enriched American philosophy and culture. There's movie makers, musicians, philosophers, scientists that came to the U.S. fleeing war in Germany. So those refugees enriched our culture, and we wouldn't have this book necessarily without this sort of sad but interesting history. So, I said a second ago, why was she? How did she know better than most what was coming in Europe? This rise of fascism and war and racist violence. Well, she's a political philosopher, basically. So she has another book called Origins of Totalitarianism that really explains what general features allow for the rise of fascist dictators and authoritarian or totalitarian politics. It's a big book, and it's really interesting. Basically, the things she saw through history playing out in her present day in Europe still apply to the United States, to Europe, to East Asia, to Africa. It still explains a lot of what's going on politically today. So I think that's pretty interesting. Philosophers can be like that sometimes because they can pull back from the detail of what's happening exactly right now. And because they know history and they know a bunch of different cultures, they can sometimes pull back and see things more clearly, almost in a way where they can read the tea leaves and see what's coming in the future. And Hannah Arendt is one of those people for sure. Okay, enough context. In the preface that we're reading, she mentions when the Russians put Sputnik up into orbit and went into outer space. So part of why I'm teaching Arendt right now is not too long ago there was the anniversary of when the U.S. first landed people on the moon. That was in '69, and so the anniversary was not too long ago. And it got me thinking, I love that we went to the moon. To me, it's one of the coolest things that human beings have ever done. But I wonder if people who are younger than me, which a lot of my students, you, are younger than me, if it means the same thing to them. So I'm about 40. I think the moon landing means something different, say, to my father, who was alive when it happened, than it does to me, someone who was not alive when it happened. And I feel like it probably means something still different to you if you weren't alive when it happened, and now I've seen advances well beyond that. So they say now that your smartphone has more computing power than the computers they used to launch Americans to the moon. And so maybe to you it's interesting, but not that impressive. To me, it's really impressive, and to my dad, it's crazy, wild, impressive. So the book we're reading by Arendt is called The Human Condition, and I'll define what the human condition means for her in a moment. But basically, the human condition is the sort of background context or background facts of life that shape or color or make possible all the little detailed stuff we do. And it's really, you can think of it as the environment around us, but think of it as the environment in terms of what gives meaning to human life, what gives the shape or color to the significance of human life. So sort of a mental environment, not just the physical, natural environment. So why Arendt talks about human beings going into space for the first time is she says, would human beings for the first time invent technology that can take us off the planet? That changes the human condition. It changes the background context of meaning for what it means to be a human being. It changes it because for all of human history before, whether you were a woman or a man, whether you were atheist, Jewish, Muslim, Taoist, whatever, every day the sun comes up and sets. Every day you can see the moon, except when there's a new moon, at night. Whatever the weather's like where you live, there's seasons. There's certain common background things. All human beings are born without asking for it. All of us die mostly without asking for it. There's certain commonalities, human condition, that shape us all and sort of form the unspoken but very real background to our lives. One of those is that wherever you go, there you are, and you're still on Earth. It wasn't something human beings hadn't done yet for most of history. It felt like something which was impossible and would never happen, going to the moon. So now that we've done it, for her, it changes what it means to be a human. Even if you don't go to the moon, ever, that something like you, a human, has gone to the moon, makes your life on Earth here different. That's her claim. And so I was trying to find some interesting philosophical way to talk about the moon landing because of the relatively recent anniversary. And I thought this is a good way into it, partly because we can generalize from the moon point and just say, Arendt helps us think about how technology sometimes just modifies what's already there. No big deal. And other times technology is a game changer, which changes what it means to be human, which changes how it feels or what significance it has to be human. So we get sort of this smaller point about the moon specifically, which I thought was interesting. And then it opens us up into this bigger question of what does it mean to be human? Which things about ourselves or our world define what it means to be human? And which, if any of these, can be changed? So I'll turn this now, before we get into what she says, I'll turn this now to our first discussion question. Okay, I'm going to tell you some of the things that she thinks are game changers that modify the human condition, that change what it means to be human. But I also want to ask you the same. Okay, so first I'll ask you, this will be one of those multi-part questions. First, I want to ask you, what do you think are the defining moments in human history? What to you are the things that once they happen, there's sort of no going back? You know, Pandora's box kind of stuff, that once this event happens, we are deeply changed forever. And you can go as far back as you want, okay? Or you can be as recent as you want. It could be something that happened yesterday, for all I know, okay? So first part of the question, before I say more about her, what do you think are the game-changing moments in human history, the things that once they happen, there's quite simply no chance of ever being the same as a human species again? So pause the recording now and put down your initial thoughts, please. Okay. Now I'll give you some of what she thinks, and I'm doing this because I don't want to just say what she thinks and then sort of force your answers to either agree or disagree with her. I wanted to see what your sort of blank slate reaction was first, and then show you what she thinks. So for her, and she mentions this in the reading we did, she says the possibility that labor could be automated entirely so that we wouldn't have to grow our own crops or build our own houses anymore, that would be, if that happens, that would be a game changer. Okay, she mentions going into outer space and the possibility of living off the Earth. So we have gone to outer space. That was a game changer. If we end up living off the Earth, well, we already live in the space station, International Space Station for some time. Like if we set up a colony on Mars or the Moon, she thinks that would change what it means to be human. She thinks nuclear weapons are a game changer. And this is where these questions get interesting, right? She wouldn't think that automatic weapons are a game changer. They don't change what it means to be a human being. Nuclear bombs, though, do. Why? Not because they kill a lot more people at once, although they do, in fact, do that. But because, you may have heard of this, but if enough nuclear weapons go off in the world at the same time, there will be something called nuclear winter, where the radiation levels will be so high that they will circulate throughout the globe. There will be such massive damage, and the way the radiation clouds work, it could block out the sun, and it's what they call nuclear winter. What that would mean is it would potentially go such that it would kill all life on Earth, plants, animals, humans, etc. So you see how for her that's a game changer. Weapons always take life. That's nothing new. And humans have probably have always taken life, and have long-term done that with weapons. But if there's weapons that, if used in a certain way, could end all life on Earth, that's a game changer. And once more, she doesn't say, if we wiped out all life on Earth, that would change the human condition. She's saying just the bare possibility, knowing that that's possible in the back of your head, just like knowing that going to the moon is possible, changes what it means, changes the significance of being human. Okay. Let's see, what else? Here's some things that we might add as possible human condition changing things. Climate change, if it goes far enough, will change what it means to be a human. Some people say that being able to search anything on Google and that Wikipedia sort of has so much information in it, easily searchable and cross-referenced, is a game changer about what it means to think. Some other possible things would be artificial intelligence. If aliens came to the Earth and it was sort of widely known, some people think they've already come. You can talk to my parents about that. They love that topic, but I have no set stance on it. Let's see, what else? If we extended the human lifespan by 50 or say 100 years, genetic manipulation, including animal-human hybrids, and there is already some human DNA in animals to make insulin for diabetics. If I'm not mistaken, they have human, is it the liver? I'm trying to remember what produces insulin in a normal human body. But there are these sort of synthetic hybrids, and they have grown, as crazy as this sounds, they've grown a human ear on the back of a mouse. So we already have these things, and these might be human condition changing things. If we could modify ourselves with animal DNA and modify animals with human DNA. And if we take Google and Wikipedia further with things like Google Glass, but sort of if our brains were hardwired to be accessible to the internet, connected to the internet at all times, that might change the human condition. So those are just some possibilities that, to me, she said some of them, other ones she didn't say, but to me might fit her definition of game changer. Okay. Back to what the human condition is for Arendt. Okay. For her, the human condition is the sort of context or background that human beings share. It's sort of like the facts about human life that shape it into what it really is. So, all human beings have toenails and fingernails, but that doesn't really change how we live. It doesn't really impact our lives in a meaningful way. These are the things she thinks mark us all sort of unconsciously that matter the most. So on page 5, she calls them, quote, the most elementary articulations of the human condition, those activities that traditionally and still in current opinion are within the range of every human being, end quote. So we all laugh, for instance, we can all laugh, but that doesn't really define human beings. But we all eat, and we have to eat. She thinks that is going to define us as part of the human condition, because if you stop laughing, it's sad. But if you stop eating, it's simply inhuman. You would die. And so much of our life is built around, and all of us, so much of our life is built around getting 2 to 4 square meals a day. Okay? And for her, I just want to point out, these things will be cross-cultural as facts. Every human being has to eat 2 to 4 times a day. But then they also change how they sort of show up in every culture. So some cultures skip breakfast. Some it's the most important meal of the day. Some cultures don't eat meat. Some cultures do. The details change place to place. The fact that human beings must eat and devote a large part of their life and money to eating is humanity as such. We all share it. Okay. So she has 3 main things that she thinks define what it means to be a human being. And you know how philosophy is. She uses words that in a very specific way, which can be confusing. We will have to try to be precise with her own usage, even though the way you and I use these words in everyday language is going to be different. The first one is what she calls labor. Okay? Labor is about securing life itself. It's necessary. You have to do it. Okay? You either have to do it for yourself or have someone do it for you. And it sort of cycles or loops or repeats. You have to eat breakfast today. Tomorrow you're going to have to eat breakfast. It's going to be pretty similar. Childbirth is, the cause of it is exactly the same. That's never changed in human history. And it still takes 9 months to make a baby, just like it still takes sun for plants to grow. And we need plants to either eat or to feed animals who we eat. And that's saying that we have different ways of raising animals now, but all human history has involved raising animals and plants to eat. And corn grows pretty much the same today as it did 1,000 years ago. So this is the natural world. It's our connection to the natural world. It's the natural facts about human bodies. It's about life itself. And this comes very close to being universal and identical across cultures. In fact, it's so widely shared among humans, we actually even share it with animals. Animals also have to eat a certain number of times a day. Animals also have to sleep, find a place that's warm enough and cold enough both at night to go to sleep. Animals also have to reproduce the species. So this is what she calls labor. Once more, that word for her refers to cyclical, natural processes that are about securing and reproducing life itself. We share these with the animals. Okay, that's the first one. The second one is what she calls work. Now, I know you think work, labor, they're synonyms, but she means it differently. And here's how you can remember this second category of the human condition. Work is because for her, it doesn't mean your job, but it means when someone contributes a work to the world, a work of art, or a body of scientific work like Newton or Einstein. It's a thing made by human hands, made by human ingenuity, that will last beyond the lifetime of its creator. So remember, labor is just sort of, it cycles every day. You got to eat, then you go to sleep. Then you got to eat, you go to sleep. And that's just about your own life. Work, though, outlasts the life of the creator, and in fact can outlast the life of whole societies. So artistic creations in ancient Greece, we still read them today, even though ancient Greek culture itself is dead. That's how long these things can last. Okay, we still read ancient Chinese philosophy, ancient Indian philosophy. We still read ancient stories from foreign cultures that don't exist anymore. That's work. It's artificial, that is made through artifice or into artifacts by human hands, whereas labor, which we just talked about, is natural. Okay, so work through making individual works makes a world as a shared built environment of things that human beings share. Okay. Work creates things with permanence and durability, whereas labor is those sort of cyclical things that have to get started basically every day from scratch. That's the second one, work. The third one is most important for her, and we'll talk about this some more in a bit. But it's what she calls action or speech or politics. So again, these are synonyms. They all point to the same thing. Action or speech or politics. Once more, she's using these words in her own specific way, which she defines, not in you and I, our everyday common use of the words. So for her, action, speech, or politics is about living together. Not about life itself as a natural process, which is labor, and not about things an individual makes and shares with others. Action, speech, or politics is about living together. It's about deciding together what we might value and why, and about what we should do. So action, speech, or politics is in constant flux, whereas work, the second category, are things that are sort of permanent and durable. Action, speech, and politics, she thinks it's like every time it's a one-off new event that you can't predict and that will have some lasting effect, but not like Newton discovering scientific laws, not like Shakespeare writing a play, right? Those things sort of stay the way they are throughout time. Political action or speech is something that like pops into the world as a new thing and can never be copied or reproduced. Okay. So action, speech, or politics is about a public space that we share where each of us show up as individuals but for our community. So it's about communication, about showing your mind to others and changing the mind of others. It's about listening to the minds of others so that you can have your mind changed as well. It's when people come together around a common value or have a common project. Action, speech, and politics, she says on page 5, are possible and important because we are not, quote, endlessly reproducible repetitions of the same model who all follow the same general laws of behavior, end quote. Okay. It's because we're all unique and because the world we live in is constantly changing. There's constantly new things that happen that nobody could have ever predicted, and the only response to them is to dive right in. Okay? So what she calls action, speech, and politics is fragile and temporary and never guaranteed, unlike work, which makes things durable and permanent, and unlike labor, which sort of loops endlessly in this sort of eternal way. You eternally have to have more food. So action, speech, and politics, her favorite part of the human condition, is all about forging coalitions. You coming together with other people in a temporary and possibly risky way to try to do something new. So this is why she says it's like being born. What she calls action, speech, and politics is like being born. You know something new is going to come out of it, but nobody can tell what until much later. Okay. So that for her is the human condition, those three core parts. There's a fourth sort of bit to it, which we've already worked our way into through action, speech, or politics. And she says the most important thing, the most generally shared thing about the human condition is this fourth thing. She calls it natality. All it means is that you are born into a world as a stranger, she says. And you have to find your way in it, that each one of us is an individual. When you were born, that is the first time that's ever happened. It is the last time that will ever happen. Now, there's 7 billion or so humans who've been born today, but since you are unlike all of them, your birth, natality, being born, was the first time that ever happened and is the last time that will ever happen. There will never be another you. Once more, these are very big philosophical kinds of ideas that she's working through here. So, we will stop this recording and start another one where we talk more about the technological aspects of this reading. Okay, thank you, everyone.